what are the current data protection laws or privacy laws in Sri Lanka?
There is no specific privacy laws.
We love data. We absolutely love data.
A fast food outlet needs my phone number.
Hello marketers, welcome to another episode of Change the Conversation. We've got our legal expert back in the house and we're going to cover a very interesting topic that is data collection and privacy law in Sri Lanka. Mahela, thanks for coming back. Jumping straight into it, what are the current data protection laws or privacy laws in Sri Lanka? Can you just let us know a bit about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, there is no specific privacy laws.
All right.
We have the Personal Data Protection Act,
All right.
which mimics a lot of what the GDPR has. So, according to this act, which came about in 2022, a lot of rights are being given to the data subject, the person whose data is being collected,
All right.
as to what can be done with that data.
Sure.
And there are restrictions being placed on how and what data can be collected. So the input and the output to some extent is regulated by it, but of course, you see, the Data Protection Act has a limitation.
Okay.
Right? And that limitation is if you consent to your data being given out,
Sure.
then there is nothing in this act that is preventing the person from taking that data.
Sure. Just want to pause there for a second. What is consent? I know the famous tick in the box if you're okay with that. Could you expand on that, or is that consent itself?
Well, the word consent, I think, will have to be taken more liberally, because more often than not, I accept will, in the digital space, now when you click I accept to any app that you're saying, you're consenting,
Sure.
right? So, voluntarily giving your information out will probably constitute consent. Let's say it doesn't have to be a digital format.
Sure.
Even somebody gives you a form to fill.
Sure.
If you voluntarily fill it and give it up,
Sure.
then that will be consent. But of course, the act provides certain restrictions on what data you can ask.
All right.
Right? That's one of the most important things that the act does, is that it says that you can only collect data that is necessary and proportionate for your use case.
There you go, putting a legal term in.
So, just to explain that, proportionate and necessary is, if I go to a fast food outlet,
Sure.
they don't need to know my religion.
Sure.
They don't need to serve me food. They don't need to know my religion.
Sure.
They don't need to know my marital status.
Sure.
They don't need those details. In fact, I would go so far as to say they don't need my phone number. They don't need my email address. So if you don't need those data, then you can't collect that data from the data subject.
So it's funny, you said I might consider phone number as unnecessary information that I need to give you.
Yeah.
But if you were to look in a lens of a marketer, we love data. We absolutely love data.
Yeah.
And when I mean data, a contact number, an email, a name.
So you can spam us.
Of course. And possibly your behavior, purchase patterns are what we'd love. But I understand the second part of what I just said is a no-go zone, especially with all the privacy is coming into play. But I find it hard to believe that a name, email, or a contact number is such a red tape or a no-go zone.
Well, that's why I said, Shazi, in my opinion.
Okay.
Obviously, this has to be tested.
Sure.
Let's see, with all these laws, the litmus test is going to court and finding out how the courts will interpret it. So one day soon, we will have somebody being taken to court.
Sure.
And then the court will explain what consent is,
Sure.
what is proportionate use,
Sure.
what is necessary use. That will be defined. And then everybody will have to fall in line after that judgment. But at the moment, there is a little bit of ambiguity as to what is meant. But the word proportionate, as far as law is concerned, is very well defined.
Sure.
It is what is necessary. So if you are going to tell me a fast food outlet needs my phone number, right? You will have to justify why it needs it. It cannot be because you want to spam me.
Sure.
It'll have to go beyond that. Right?
Sure.
And you will have to explain why it needs it. Say, for example, I'll give you another example. An employer may want to know the employee's marital status and whether they have children.
Okay.
No, I think that data is necessary because the employer will provide you with insurance.
Sure.
To provide insurance, you need to know how many people you are insuring.
Yeah.
So therefore, needing to know the marital status, the name of the spouses, the name of the children is fair game. I think.
Sure.
But so we'll have to take it on a case-by-case basis to understand what is necessary for a particular use case on whatever, in a particular case where you're collecting data.
Sure. And see, you're here to help us navigate this space and hopefully not let us end up in one of those cases, right? So being proactive, how do we make sure we collect the right data in line with the law? What tips can you give marketers in how we approach data collection, storage, and so on?
Well, the requirement is you have to expressly get consent when you are collecting data. That's the first thing. You can't collect data without consent. Right? So it has to be on the back end or whatever. You can't collect data without consent. Secondly, the data that you collect, like I said, must be what is necessary for the purposes of use. And if you are done using that data, you can anonymize that data and keep it, but only for a reasonable period of time. If I'm not mistaken, I can't 100% remember the act exactly, Shazri, but I think there is a limitation provided on how long you can store the data as well. Right? You can't keep the data forever. So my advice, if you're asking about as a marketer what you can collect, provided you get consent from a person, collecting any data should be fine, right? But then you have to be careful how you are processing that data, because it places an obligation. Let's say, for example, you're collecting the data, but you are outsourcing the processing that data to somebody else, a person outside of Sri Lanka, a person in Sri Lanka. Then you have the obligation to make sure that those people are also compliant with the Data Protection Act on how it has to happen. So the burden to a great extent is on the person collecting and processing the data.
Okay.
So that's you, the market.
No pressure, right? So I just want to pause here and explain a use case in data. Obviously, we know the fast food chains, the supermarkets, the phone number, the email is a core data point that links to various offers that can be given, actually helping the user, him or herself, to get a better experience. Where do we draw the line there? Because why we collect data is to provide a better experience to that user. What are your thoughts on that in terms of justifying?
Again, it's an opinion that I possess here. But I think, look, provided what your objective is to provide the customer with a better experience, then you are okay. What you're doing is you're collecting his data for the purpose of providing them with better, offers or whatever. But if that goes into the realm of spanning your customer, that is a thin line, unfortunately. But if you go into the realm of spanning, then it'll be something of problem.
Okay. So you do not like those fast food offers coming to your phone, is it?
I mean, I don't.
But someone can argue it's timely. We know that you love your pizzas or fast food or so on.
Yeah, you can make that argument. So, like I said, this act is very raw, right? We don't know how it's going to be interpreted. So, like you said, the case can be made that this is necessary and proportionate use. If that is the case, then there's no problem. But, sorry, if I want to just add something more. Now, now that we touched on these solicited messages, these spam messages, we call it, that come to your phone and so on and so forth, the law specifically talks about. The Act very specifically in section 27 talks about these solicited messages and provides certain restrictions. Number one, the person receiving the messages must have consented to receiving those messages. You can't send them messages without. Now, if you notice, you will have noticed a reduction in the amount of messages you get also from certain companies who are now becoming data compliant in Sri Lanka. Right? Number two, you have to give an opt-out option. Now, if you look at certain mobile service providers, they will, in that advertisement at the bottom, say to block this message, type etc. Right? You will say XYZ, you type and then you can block it. So an opt-out option has to be given. Right? And finally, you must give the nature and identity of the data controller. The person who is providing that data has to be made known. So now it is no longer a free-for-all that anybody can send any message to me after getting my phone number. To give you an example, I passed out from law school in 2009.
Right.
But even to date, I get a newsletter from a particular law school in Sri Lanka,
Which name you cannot mention.
which I cannot mention, asking me to do their LLB program.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
So this, and I have never visited this place,
Okay.
Now the question is, how did they get that data? Somebody sold it.
Sure.
Somebody I gave my data to sold it.
Sure.
So this act now, I understand we're talking in the context of marketing here, but it goes far beyond. When you collect our data,
Sure.
what it can do.
Sure.
Say for example, as somebody collects your health matrix,
Sure.
health data,
Sure.
and then they sell it to an insurance company.
Sure.
Then the insurance company refuses to give you a life cover
Sure.
based on your data that they collect. So these can have very serious impacts on our lives.
Right.
So that is why I think the Data Protection Act goes a little overboard
Sure.
in trying to protect the data.
Sure. The present Data Protection Act, has it taken inspiration from the GDPR
Absolutely.
and so on?
Yeah, 100%. It has taken a lot of inspiration from the GDPR. Most of it is from the GDPR.
Okay. So going back to my earlier explanation about use of data, so obviously the selling point is where they frequently ask, can I have your contact number and so on.
Correct.
From there, it is usually stored in a CRM system for later use, obviously to possibly sell back to that potential
Correct, yeah.
audience. So on. Any thoughts about that and how us as marketers can manage that process?
Yes, I think you have to be more open about why you're collecting that data.
Okay.
That has to be upfront. You have to be upfront and say, look, we're collecting this data so that we can provide you with offers in the future.
Okay.
Do you want to take part in this activity? Okay. So you have to be more upfront rather than just coming up to the customer and saying, give us the phone number. Sure. Without an explanation as to why you need the phone number. Just asking for the phone number. You can't do that. You may have to be a little more forthcoming as to why you're collecting that data. And the thing is this, Shazri, in this consumer-driven economy, a lot of people will want to get these offers. So they will voluntarily give their phone number.
Sure. Sure.
There is no reason for me to not give it, right? So, but you can't make giving the phone number a barrier for me purchasing something. Because that's not necessary. For me to purchase something, you don't need my phone number.
Sure.
But you can't make it a barrier. But you can ask the person, look, do you want to receive? This happens in most of the foreign websites now. You will have a little tick box that says, if you want to receive promotional material from us, click yes. So sometimes I click yes, sometimes I click no.
I'm going to ask a really silly question, or you might think
Right.
it's silly. You know, these terms and conditions, how long they are, right? And in between there, someone's going to say, we're going to use this data for X, Y, and Z.
Correct.
Is there any sort of merit for a user to say, listen, this is way too long. I wanted to access the information at that point. I consented on the basis that I only have to give my phone number for the initial process. But when I read through the entire thing, which was about 6 pages long, it says you're going to use my data for years and years and years.
Well, so now we are moving towards the realm of contract law.
Sorry, okay.
Right? Okay. So what happens when we click yes to any of these, we call it EULAs, end user licensing agreements, right? When we click yes to these, it will have lots of clauses and you and I will never read those.
Sure.
We just click I accept because we want to get to the
Sure.
user page, right? So the law is that once you click I accept, you have entered into a contract. So once you enter into the contract, you are bound by whatever is said there.
So, Mahela, can any aspect of your data and how it's stored privacy be put in those statements? They can.
Absolutely. They can put in those, what they are going to use it for. So when you click I accept, you are accepting it.
Sure.
But there are certain fail safes now that the law has provided, which the law creates obligations. Say, for example, one requirement is you have to give the data subject access to their data. Meaning, if I am the data subject and you have collected my data, I have the right to ask you, can I know what data you have on me?
Right. Okay.
Right? Can I ask you to edit this data that is not correct anymore?
Okay.
And finally, most importantly, the right to disappear. I can ask you to erase my data.
And to do this,
Yeah.
I think GDPR is very clear. There is a clear owner of that data.
Yeah.
Does the Sri Lankan law cover that?
I think it's the same.
Okay.
I think it's and to be very, like if you look at most of these social media platforms that we use, they're already GDPR compliant. So they already give you that option now. So it's built in. So if you want to go on Facebook, let's say for example, you can go into the privacy settings and look at all the data they have on you, and you can delete it. Ask them to delete it. You can become anonymous.
I don't like you right now because you're teaching the audience how not to make our life pretty difficult, because like I said, data is king, but I understand the point that data collected should be in the right way.
Correct.
So in summary, when data is collected, it has to be crystal clear to the user providing that data why we're collecting that data for. And you mentioned thereafter, in terms of how we save it and for how long we save it, is a key point.
And like I said, you have to have systems in place which will allow your data subject to access your data.
Sure.
Which is, I don't think in Sri Lanka, a lot of people have systems like that.
Yes.
Right? Which is something you're going to have to build in.
Sure.
Because now once the data protection authority is established, every company is expected to have a data protection officer. So you will have to now in your company also assign someone as a data protection officer.
Right.
They are answerable to the data protection authority.
Sure.
And if there's a leak of data, you have to inform them. And the fines are extremely high.
Let's flash it up there for everyone to see. So a lot of marketing companies work with partners, agencies. How does that work? Obviously, the initial agreement is with the user and the company, but there are also partners that supply to that company that may use that data.
Yeah.
How does that?
So that's a bit of a difficult question to answer, because if you are collecting my data, but then you are using that data for one of your customers, then the question is, have I consented for that use case?
Oof.
Right? But I think, Shazri, again, we have to realign how we collect data.
Sure.
You have to realign the collection of data. At that point of collection, you have to make it clear why you're collecting. That you will use it for your customer base, to market your customer base, and that your when I mean your customers, I mean your partners.
Sure.
Right? Your partners' promotional material will be funneled to you.
So the statement would be something like the company and its partners.
Yeah. Okay. So something like that. I mean, we don't know the exact wording how it will have to go, but you will have to make it clear to me why you're collecting my data. You have an obligation not to give my data to a third party, because there's a confidentiality requirement also built into this law. Right?
Sure.
So this law is very stringent.
Sure.
Right? It creates a confidentiality clause. But now, if you are not giving your partner the data, you are using the data that you have collected to assist and promote your partner's business.
Sure.
So then, therefore, you are technically not violating the confidentiality clause.
Okay.
The question is whether you have the right to send me that other material. Because I gave your data for X. I gave my data to you for X. Now you are using it for Y.
Sure.
So have you gotten my permission to do that? Okay. And you have to give me an opt-out clause. That's the other thing.
See, Mahela, we have the liberty of having an expert like you in-house taking us through some of these, red tapes for better understanding. But practically, when you go out there to the masses and even the larger marketing fraternity, the companies, there's a lot of training that is required.
Got it.
And the Privacy Act has been there for
about a year.
About a year. How do you think the progress is? What should we do to educate ourselves, be more knowledgeable on this topic?
I think first step will be that once the authority is set up and once the law becomes fully applicable. Right now, there's a bit of a grace period that the companies have been given to become compliant. So once the law becomes fully applicable, I can't remember exactly the specifics, but once that happens, then it will have to be a process of education, obviously. People will have to become educated. But I also think, Shashi, all we will need is 1 or 2 cases.
Okay.
1 or 2 people will be taken to task.
Sure.
Once that happens, everybody else will get in line.
Sure.
Right? But until that happens, somebody will have to take them to court saying, you have violated my data privacy.
So right now you say the gap While the law is there, the gap is the interpretation of it, so to
Correct,
speak?
yes.
Okay, all right.
That's the only gap, but of course we know to a great extent how it will happen because the GDPR has already to a great extent defined these things.
Right.
And most of the global players have complied. No,
Sure.
So those are the big data collectors.
Sure.
So therefore it's not too much of a problem. So the marketing fraternity in Sri Lanka will simply have to follow that trend.
Sure. Okay, all right. Cool. So that brings to an end this week's or this month's podcast. We'll be back with another expert helping us marketers navigating the ever-changing environment. Thanks and see you soon.